At the center of this story is the Addams family, an icon of the American dream. From the outside, the Addams appear to be the epitome of perfect harmony. Leon Addams, a suave man in his 50s, has built a small empire in real estate development. His wife, Isadora, is a former model whose beauty has not faded over the years. Her daughter Azura and Isadora's stepson Felim are both talented young people. But behind the perfect facade lie dark secrets, forbidden desires, and hidden resentments. Leon and Isadora's whirlwind romance and subsequent marriage had been the talk of Maple Grove, a beacon of hope for those who believed in love after loss. The integration of their children into a cohesive family unit seemed effortless, a testament to their parenting and the adaptability of youth. Yet beneath this carefully cultivated image of familial bliss, currents of tension and secrets ran deep. The walls of their house held whispers of unspoken truths, forbidden desires, and simmering resentments. Leon Addams's journey to the pinnacle of suburban success was paved with both triumph and tragedy. Born to working-class parents in Pittsburgh, he had clawed his way up the socio-economic ladder through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to spot lucrative real estate opportunities. By his mid-30s, Leon had established a company that would eventually reshape the skyline of several mid-sized Pennsylvania cities. His first marriage to Olwyn, a college sweetheart, had been a partnership of equals. Together they navigated the challenges of building a business while raising their daughter Azura. Olwyn's sudden death from an aneurysm when Azura was just 12 had left Leon a widower, forcing him to balance his grief with the responsibilities of single parenthood and an expanding enterprise. For 5 years, Leon poured himself into work and fatherhood, his romantic life relegated to the back burner. It wasn't until a chance encounter at a charity gala that he met Isadora, a woman whose allure would reignite his passion for life and love. Isadora's path had been markedly different from Leon's. Discovered by a modeling scout at 16, she had graced runways and magazine covers throughout her 20s. Her marriage to photographer Maynard Ford had produced a son, Felim, but the union crumbled under the weight of Maynard's infidelities and Isadora's fading modeling career. Divorced at 35, Isadora found herself navigating single motherhood and a world that seemed to value youth above all else. When Leon and Isadora's worlds collided, it was as if the universe had decided to grant them both a second chance at happiness. Their courtship was swift and intense, culminating in a lavish wedding that was the social event of the year in Maple Grove. The newly formed Addams family moved into the house, ready to begin their life together. Azura Addams, now 20 and studying psychology at a prestigious university, had initially struggled with her father's remarriage. Fiercely intelligent and deeply loyal to her late mother's memory, Azura approached her new family dynamic with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant acceptance. Over time, however, she found herself warming to Isadora's genuine attempts at connection and the novel experience of having a brother figure in her life. Felim Ford, 22 and freshly graduated with a degree in business, viewed his mother's marriage to Terran with a pragmatic eye. He appreciated the stability and opportunities that came with being part of the Addams family, even as he harbored ambitions of forging his own path in the business world. Charming and adaptable, Felim seemed to ease into his role as stepson and brother with natural grace. As the family settled into their new dynamic, outsiders marveled at how seamlessly they had blended. Terran and Isadora were seen as pillars of the community, hosting charity events and involving themselves in local politics. As Terran gathered his briefcase and car keys, he paused to kiss Isadora goodbye. With that, he was gone, the sound of his car engine fading as he drove away. The day progressed without incident. Azura left for her summer job at the local library, while Isadora busied herself with household tasks and preparations for an upcoming charity event. The house settled into a quiet lull, the calm before an ending storm. It was just past 3 p.m. when Leon's car unexpectedly pulled into the driveway. His meeting had concluded early, a rare occurrence that left him with mixed feelings of triumph and unease. The deal had been secured faster than anticipated, leaving him with an unfamiliar stretch of free time. As he entered the house, the silence struck him as odd. Isadora's car was gone, likely out running errands. Leon loosened his tie, deciding to use this unexpected free time to relax before sharing the good news with his family. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallway as he climbed the stairs, intent on changing into more comfortable clothes. As he approached the upper landing, a muffled sound caught his attention. It came from Azura's room, a mix of whispers and what sounded unsettlingly like stifled laughter. Concern and curiosity vied within Leon as he approached the door. He raised his hand to knock, but something held him back. The whispers grew more distinct, and with a jolt, Leon realized there were two voices, one unmistakably male. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to the doorknob. In the split second before he turned it, a part of Leon's mind screamed at him to stop, to walk away, to preserve the sanctity of trust between father and daughter. But that voice was drowned out by a rising tide of parental concern and an irrational surge of anger at the thought of some boy in his daughter's room. The door swung open. Time seemed to freeze as Leon's mind struggled to process the scene before him. On Azura's bed lay his daughter and stepson, their entangled limbs in a state of undress, leaving no doubt as to the nature of their activities. For a heartbeat, the tableau held Leon in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and dawning rage. Azura and Felim, their eyes wide with fear and guilt, scrambled to cover themselves. Then, like a dam bursting, chaos erupted. Leon's world narrowed to a pinpoint of fury and betrayal. "What the hell is going on here?" he thundered, his eyes darting between Azura and Felim, who were frantically pulling on discarded clothing. But Leon was beyond explanations. He rounded on Felim, who stood frozen. "You!" he snarled, jabbing a finger at his stepson's chest. "How dare you in my house with my daughter?" With a roar of incoherent rage, Leon lunged at Felim, his hands closing around the young man's throat. They stumbled backwards, crashing into Azura's desk, sending books and ornaments clattering to the floor. Azura screamed, pleading with her father to stop, but her words fell on deaf ears. Leon's world had contracted to this single act of violence, his fingers tightening as Felim's face turned an alarming shade of purple. In desperation, Felim's hand scrabbled across the desk, closing around a heavy crystal paperweight. With the last of his strength, he brought it crashing against the side of his stepfather's head. Leon's grip loosened as he staggered, blood streaming from the gash on his temple. But the blow had only served to further enrage him. He tackled Felim to the ground, the two men grappling on the floor, a frenzied tangle of limbs and fury. In the chaotic struggle, Leon's hand closed once more around Felim's throat. Filled with rage and bleeding profusely, he squeezed with all his might. Felim's struggles grew weaker, his eyes bulging as he gasped for air that wouldn't come. Azura's screams faded to background noise as Leon poured every ounce of his betrayal and anger into his grip. It wasn't until Felim's body went limp beneath him that the red mist began to clear from his vision. Slowly, horrifyingly, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. Leon released his grip and scrambled backwards, his hand shaking uncontrollably as he stared at the motionless form of his stepson. The aftermath of Felim's death plunged the Adams household into a nightmare of panic, guilt, and desperate decision-making. Leon, his clothes spattered with blood and his mind reeling, stared at the lifeless body of his stepson as Azura's hysterical sobs filled the room. "We have to call the police," Azura choked out between gasps, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone. Leon cut her off, his tone shifting from shock to a cold, calculated calm that chilled Azura to her core. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. "This was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident. But if the police come now, they won't see it that way. They'll destroy our family, our lives, everything we've built." Azura stared at her father, barely recognizing the man before her. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "We need to clean this up," Leon replied, his mind already racing through scenarios. "Your mother can never know what really happened here. Do you understand?" For a moment Azura looked as though she might refuse, but then, whether out of shock, fear, or some twisted sense of loyalty, she nodded. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Leon, drawing on skills he never knew he possessed, methodically erased all traces of the struggle from Azura's room. Blood-stained carpets were torn up, furniture rearranged, and incriminating items bagged for disposal. Azura, still in a state of shock, followed her father's instructions mechanically. She scrubbed surfaces, laundered clothes, and helped move Felim's body, wrapped in a tarp, to the garage. As twilight descended on Maple Grove, Leon made a series of phone calls to his secretary, cancelling all appointments for the next few days due to a family emergency. To Isadora, his voice carefully modulated to convey concern rather than guilt, asking if she'd heard from Felim. to the local police, reporting his stepson missing, his tone a master class in worried parental concern. When Isadora returned home, she found Leon and Azura seated in the living room, their faces grave. Leon spun a tale of Phelim storming out after an argument, of unanswered calls and growing worry. Azura, her eyes red-rimmed from tears that were all too real, corroborated her father's story with a nod. As night fell, the Adams house became a hub of anxious activity. Friends and neighbours, alerted to Phelim's disappearance, arrived with casseroles and words of support. Police officers came and went, taking statements and assuring the family that they were doing everything possible to locate the missing young man. Through it all, Leon maintained his facade of concerned stepfather, his arm around a distraught Isadora, his voice steady as he answered questions and thanked well-wishers. Only Azura, watching her father with a mixture of fear and disbelief, knew the terrible truth that lay behind his performance. As the last visitors departed and Isadora finally succumbed to exhaustion, Leon pulled Azura aside. "Remember," he murmured, "this is to protect our family." Azura, trapped in a nightmare of her own making, could only nod, sealing their pact of silence. As days stretched into weeks with no sign of the young man, the initial worry gave way to darker speculations. Detective Ralph Hill, a veteran of the police department, took charge of the investigation. A methodical and perceptive investigator, Hill had seen his fair share of missing persons cases, but something about this one nagged at his instincts. His first formal interview with the Adams family took place in their immaculate living room, the atmosphere heavy with tension barely masked by southern hospitality. Isadora, her eyes red-rimmed and hands clasping a barely touched cup of tea, recounted the last time she had seen her son. Hill's gaze shifted to Leon, noting the man's composed demeanour. "Mr. Adams, you reported having an argument with Phelim the day he disappeared. Can you tell me more about that?" Leon's response was measured, rehearsed to perfection in the dark hours of sleepless nights. "It was nothing serious," he explained. "Just a disagreement about Phelim's career plans. I wanted him to consider joining the family business, but he was set on pursuing his own path. I may have pushed too hard." "And you, Miss Adams?" he asked, turning to Azura. "Did you witness this argument?" Azura, her face a mask of carefully cultivated grief, shook her head. "I was at work. When I got home, Phelim was already gone." As the interview progressed, Hill probed gently but persistently, noting the family's reactions. Isadora's genuine distress, Leon's controlled responses, and Azura's withdrawn demeanour all painted a complex picture that the detective couldn't quite decipher. In the days that followed, Hill and his team delved deeper into Phelim's life. They interviewed friends, colleagues from his internship, and even ex-girlfriends. A portrait emerged of a young man with ambition, charm, and no apparent reason to vanish without a trace. Yet, as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies began to surface. Phelim's phone records showed no outgoing calls or messages on the day of his disappearance. His car, found parked at a local trailhead, yielded no useful evidence, and most puzzlingly, none of his friends corroborated the story of plans to meet up on the day he vanished. As Detective Hill pinned another lead to the growing caseboard in the precinct, he couldn't shake the feeling that the key to this mystery lay within the walls of their house. As weeks turned into months, the facade of normalcy at the Adams residence began to crack under the weight of their shared secret. Leon threw himself into work with renewed vigour, his aggressive expansion of development raising eyebrows in local business circles. Isadora's once vibrant social life withered as she retreated into a shell of grief and confusion, and Azura, haunted by the dual spectres of loss and complicity, withdrew from friends and studies alike. It was Azura who first showed signs of breaking under the strain. Her nights were plagued by vivid nightmares, her days by a gnawing guilt that threatened to consume her. The sight of her father going about his life as if nothing had happened filled her with a mixture of awe and revulsion. One particularly bad night, after waking from a dream of Phelim's accusing eyes, Azura found herself in the kitchen, a glass of water trembling in her hand. She didn't hear Isadora enter until her stepmother spoke, making her jump. "Can't sleep either?" Isadora asked softly, her own face etched with the lines of chronic insomnia. Something in Isadora's gentle tone, so reminiscent of Phelim, broke through Azura's carefully constructed walls. Before she could stop herself, words began to spill out, disjointed at first, Then, in a torrent of confession, Isadora listened, her face a canvas of shifting emotions, disbelief, horror, and finally a devastating understanding. When Azura finally fell silent, tears streaming down her face, Isadora did something unexpected. She pulled her stepdaughter into a tight embrace. "I knew," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I knew about you and Felim. I should have said something, should have stopped it. This is my fault too." As dawn broke over Maple Grove, they made a pact of their own to confront Leon and bring the truth to light. Leon's reaction to their united front was explosive. His carefully maintained composure shattered as he raged against their betrayal, his words a toxic mix of threats and pleas for understanding. It was in this moment of unguarded fury that Detective Hill, arriving for a follow-up interview, overheard the damning confession through the open window of his unmarked car. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Police swarmed the Adams residence, securing the scene and separating the family members for questioning. Leon, realizing the game was up, retreated into stony silence, requesting a lawyer. Azura and Isadora, however, unburdened by their confession, provided full statements. As the truth came to light, the community of Maple Grove reeled from the revelations. The illicit relationship between step-siblings, Isadora's silent knowledge, and Leon's fatal outburst painted a picture of a family torn apart by secrets and lies. In the midst of the chaos, Detective Hill focused on the grim task at hand. With Leon's reluctant cooperation, Felim's body was recovered from its hasty grave in a remote wooded area. The discovery brought a measure of closure to Isadora, even as it sealed the case against her husband. The case against Leon Adams seemed airtight, built on physical evidence and corroborating testimonies. Yet as the trial approached, a new development threatened to upend the prosecution's carefully constructed narrative. Amidst the mountain of evidence being processed, a forensics technician made a startling discovery. DNA found under Felim's fingernails didn't match Leon's profile. Instead, it pointed to an unknown male contributor. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Detective Hill, his certainty shaken, ordered a re-examination of all evidence. As the team delved deeper, more inconsistencies emerged. The angle of bruising on Felim's neck suggested a left-handed attacker, while Leon was right-handed. Fibers found on the body didn't match those from the Adams home. Pressure mounted on the prosecution as these findings came to light. The defense, sensing an opportunity, pushed for all charges against Leon to be dropped. However, the judge ruled that given the confessions and circumstantial evidence, the trial would proceed. Azura and Isadora, their united front beginning to crack under the strain of uncertainty, found themselves questioning their own memories of that fateful day. Had they been too quick to accept Leon's guilt, blinded by their own complicity in the events leading up to Felim's death? As the trial date loomed, all parties involved grappled with the implications of this new information. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex than anyone had initially believed. In the courtroom, battle lines were drawn, with both prosecution and defense preparing to argue their interpretations of the increasingly convoluted evidence. The courtroom was packed on the day Leon Adams was scheduled to take the stand, the air thrumming with tension as he was sworn in, his once commanding presence diminished by months in custody. As questioning began, Leon's responses were measured, his demeanor calm. Until the defense attorney broached the subject of the new DNA evidence. Leon's composure cracked, his eyes darting to where Azura sat in the gallery. In that moment, something seemed to break within him. To the shock of everyone present, he began to speak, his words pouring out in a torrent of confession, but not the one anyone expected. "I didn't kill Felim," Leon declared, his voice raw with emotion, "but I am responsible for his death." He went on to describe the events of that day, but with a crucial difference. When he had walked in on Azura and Felim, he admitted he had indeed been enraged. But it was Azura, in a panic to protect her lover and their secret, who had lashed out violently. "I walked in and saw them together," Leon recounted, his words echoing in the stunned silence of the courtroom. "I was angry, yes, but before I could even speak, Azura grabbed the paperweight. She struck Felim again and again. By the time I pulled her off, it was too late." The courtroom erupted into chaos, as Leon described how, in a moment of paternal instinct, he had decided to protect his daughter. He had sent a hysterical Azura to clean herself up while he staged the scene to implicate himself, believing he could better weather the storm of a police investigation. "I never imagined it would go this far," he concluded, tears streaming down his face. "I was trying to protect my little girl, but I see now that I've destroyed us all." As Leon's words hung in the air, all eyes turned to Azura. Her face had drained of color, her body rigid with shock. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she could only manage a barely audible whisper, "It's true." In the gallery, Isadora collapsed into silent sobs, the full weight of her family's destruction finally too much to bear. Detective Hill, his case shattered but his instincts vindicated, began the mental process of reconstructing the investigation. As Leon was led from the stand, the courtroom remained in stunned silence, grappling with this final devastating twist in a case that had already defied expectations at every turn. The revelation of Azura's culpability and Leon's false confession threw the trial into disarray. The judge declared a mistrial, and both prosecution and defense scrambled to reassess their strategies in light of the new information. Azura was immediately taken into custody, her bail hearing scheduled for the following week. The prosecution, caught off guard by the turn of events, requested time to review the evidence and potentially file new charges against both Azura and Leon. Azura's defense team quickly began building a case around temporary insanity and a crime of passion, emphasizing her youth and the shocking circumstances that led to her actions. They also didn't hesitate to shine a light on the questionable dynamics within the Adams household that had allowed the relationship between step-siblings to develop unchecked. The trials of Azura Adams and Leon Adams, though separate, were inextricably linked in the public consciousness. Azura's trial came first, a somber affair that saw the once vibrant young woman appearing pale and withdrawn in the defendant's box. Her defense team, as planned, pursued a strategy of temporary insanity, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of forbidden love and the fear of discovery. The prosecution painted a different picture, portraying Azura as a calculating individual who had engaged in an illicit relationship and then committed murder to keep it hidden. They emphasized the brutality of the attack and Azura's subsequent participation in the cover-up. Key testimony came from Isadora, who spoke of her suspicions about Azura and Felim's relationship and her regret at not intervening. Her words, delivered through tears, seemed to sway some jurors but alienate others who saw her inaction as complicity. After days of deliberation, the juries in both trials returned with their verdicts, bringing the legal saga of the Adams family to its conclusion. Azura Adams was found guilty of second-degree murder, with the jury rejecting the insanity plea but acknowledging the crime's unpremeditated nature. The judge, taking into account Azura's age and the unusual circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Leon Adams was found guilty on charges of obstruction of justice and filing a false report. The judge, noting the unique circumstances and Leon's eventual confession, sentenced him to 5 years in prison with 2 years suspended. The Adams case is a clear example of how a perfect exterior never reveals the truth within. Under the veneer of a successful and happy family, hidden tensions, secrets and desires can build up and explode at any time. The lesson from this case is that honest communication and mutual understanding are the core of building a truly strong family. Any relationship needs sincerity and sharing to avoid unnecessary tragedies. Follow our channel to discover dramatic and mysterious true cases. Join us to investigate, analyze, and find out the truth behind each story. Register now to not miss the most interesting content.